Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 247 DIY. As you can see, I've got the 2012 Forester back up on the lift, and once again I'm going to be going ahead and replacing out almost every single component of the exhaust system, so stay tuned for that. Alright guys, so I figured I'll just give you a little bit of a walkthrough on what's going on currently with the exhaust system on the Forester, the parts that are on it now, why I've made the changes that I've made, and why we're going to be making more changes to it today. It may be a little bit wordy, a little bit boring. I'll be sure to leave chapters down below like I always do. If you just want to skip ahead to the work, I don't blame you. Those chapters will be down below. You can skip ahead and just look at the work that was involved in getting everything changed out here. But for those of you who maybe haven't been following the channel, or even if you have, I haven't really gone into a detail because a lot of this was done before I started the channel. I'm just going to do a walkthrough front to back, explain everything that's been done up to this point and the changes that we're going to be making today. So first up in the front is the exhaust manifold, and on there currently is the Nameless Performance unequal length manifold. So to go way back to the very beginning, we'll start this saga out. With the factory system on there, I got a whole bunch of check engine lights starting a while ago, and what I chalked that up to being was this had, like a lot of the FB25 Foresters of the era, this was one of the first ones that came out of the factory. They continued to make the FB25, and as far as I know, they've resolved the problem. But the original ones that were rolled out, they had a terrible oil consumption problem, and even though Subaru of America honored the fact that that was a big issue, you could bring it back in the dealership, and if it was consuming an egregious amount of oil, they would go ahead and pull the engine out, replace the case halves, and then install it back for you, which I had done. Unfortunately, which I personally think is a big downfall with Subaru of America with that, is they didn't include the catalytic converters in part of that extended service warranty. And anybody who knows catalytic converters in vehicles knows that they are easily contaminated by oil. So it wasn't, I don't know, I think it was just shy of 100,000 miles. I started getting catalyst inefficiency codes, and I was pretty positive that it was the cats. So what I did is I jumped on eBay and I found Magnaflow replacement units, both the header and the mid pipe. And up there on the wall of my Subaru parts, that's the Magnaflow mid pipe right there. When I got it in, you can see I put the Eastwood coating on there. I live in the Northeast, I didn't want a lot of rust, but it's got the coating on there. Thought it was going to be really nice. I installed it and it sounded absolutely terrible. So I had to pull it back off. Didn't understand why it sounded so terrible. I ended up pressure testing it. I made some block off plates and pressurized it up to about 40 psi. And literally, and I'm not exaggerating here to try to prove a point, literally almost every single weld on this, when you sprayed it with soapy water, was bubbling. The welds were absolutely terrible. I did contact Magnaflow. They wouldn't give me a refund on my money, but they did send me a free replacement. But at that point, I was just not confident in installing it. Marked it down a little bit, sold that on eBay, and then this went on the wall. And it was in the time that I was waiting for that to come in that I stumbled across the Inferno Fabrications manifold. I do believe I said Nameless Performance earlier. This is Inferno Fabrications unequal length header, which I thought was pretty cool because one, it uses a lot larger diameter piping than the factory unit, and it's unequal length. With these FB25s and I believe the FAs as well, Subaru switched to an equal length, which yes, they're more efficient and all that, but the unequal length is what started that Subaru sound that everybody likes. And to try to get it back, I thought it was a pretty cool option to go with the unequal length. Now, the manifold itself is beautiful. This guy does amazing work. You do have to wait a bit. Everything's made to order, and he's seems to be very busy lately. We'll get into that in a minute. But the welds are beautiful. The construction of the unit is absolutely beautiful. I love it, and it's honestly killing me to have to take it off. The problem is he uses these Magnaflow catalytic converters. Now, obviously, he can't make his own catalytic converters. He just has to use off the shelf. But something about these high flow cats is they just fail over time. This is the second one. I contacted him, I got the part number for it, had a local shop weld in the new one for me, and then this one, it's been about 1.5 years now, and the catalyst has come loose in there, and eventually what happens is it starts to fall apart, and then you start blowing chunks of cat out the tailpipe. Really obnoxious. Some people would live with that, but it's really obnoxious. I'm not going to drive around like that, and the fact that it's about a 2 year to 1.5 year replacement on these It's just not something that I want to go through the headache of having to drop my vehicle off at a shop, and you know, then I'm down a vehicle for the day and I got to orchestrate rides to get out there and back and all that nonsense. If I knew how to weld myself, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but that's that. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw the factory manifold back on there. Now you might be saying you had issues with the factory manifold. Why would you throw that back on there? Well, after I installed both the primary catted manifold with that Magnaflow unit and the secondary catted pipe with the Magnaflow unit, and then I had that issue with that manifold, I pulled the Magnaflow manifold back off and I ran the factory manifold until I could figure out what I was going to do. And having this one being replaced and both new oxygen sensors in there, so I can't determine whether it was the sensors or whether it was the catalytic converter, I didn't get any more check engine lights. Maybe I got one, I don't remember, but it wasn't like it was where like every few days it was popping on. For the most part, the check engine light stayed off. So I think that factory unit might be all right. So at least for now, that one doesn't make a terrible noise. I'm gonna throw that on and then we'll see what happens. If the check engine light starts coming back on, unfortunately I live in New York, which means we're carb compliant, and the factory replacement unit for the carb compliant states is a $3,400 part. That's not with labor, that's just the part itself for the manifold with the cat in, it's $3,400. There is the non-carb compliant one, which is only $1,200. In New York, we don't do smog checks, at least the area of New York I'm in, so I could always throw that on and no one would know the difference, but I'll have to make a decision on that, but that'll be after we install that and if I run into any problems. So then we come to this mid-pipe. Same thing happened on this mid-pipe. My wife and I were on vacation up in the Adirondacks, and then all of a sudden we were driving around and terrible rattle. This catalytic converter here came loose. So yeah, that was that whole fiasco. Basically what it is, I pulled this off and I gutted it because I didn't have anything to go in there in the meantime. And with it all broken up and falling apart, it wasn't doing any good anyway. And on these Foresters, the secondary cat's not monitored. So it's really, at least the way I look at it, it's not part of the emission system because it's not tied into the sensors or anything. It's not monitored at all. So I guess on a loophole that I'm making up, it's not part of the actual emission system, which means that it shouldn't be a violation of messing with your car's emission system. I'm probably wrong in that, and the EPA probably doesn't agree, but the fact that whether this cat is here or not, the car continues to run just fine. It doesn't throw any check engine lights or anything like that. I gutted it, and we're going to be replacing it with this. And what we have here is the Inferno Fabrications Catless mid-pipe for this car. This is where I said I would get into talking about the wait time. I really didn't want this video to be talking about the bad experience, but I figured it would be noted. I don't want to give these products a glowing review and then lead people to having a bad experience. When I put the manifold in that car, when I ordered it, I forget off the top of my head, I think it's like 10 to 12 weeks. It says his lead time on that, and it was. Honestly, he contacted me early. I think it was like 8 or 9 weeks. He contacted me early, said, hey, manifold's done. Shipped it right out to me. Communication was great throughout the whole process. I had absolutely no issues with this one. This one was the same thing. I want to say it was like 8 to 10 week lead time, it said on his site or something like that. Time went by. I think we got to like the 12-week mark, and I was like, I'm going to email him and see what's up. Then got kind of an automated email that he had set up saying that he got COVID, which is understandable. I'm not going to get upset that somebody got sick, but he said that, you know, for the time being, all orders were on hold. He was going to be perfectly willing to take refunds if people wanted to back out of their orders, which was understood. I didn't need this on the car right then, so I just held on. And then months and months went by, recontacted him, was super hard to get a hold of. You'd send him an email, you wouldn't hear from him for days, weeks sometimes. Send him a brand new email because it'd be like a reply on the other one, send him a brand new email and he'd say, oh no, I didn't see your reply on the other email. And then again, weeks and weeks would go by. The communication on this was honestly really poor. Again, I'm not sitting here trying to bash anybody. I just want to give those of you who might be interested in the product a heads up on what you might run into. Eventually, I got the pipe, and then I went to install it, being knuckle-brained. I cut this too short. I didn't quite realize exactly how it was meant to go together. I cut it too short, so then I contacted him and was like, hey, I just need a replacement extension piece. Can I get that? And, you know, we worked something out, but again, that took forever, poor communication, get a hold of him. He said, hey, I shipped it out, and then nothing was coming to me. I'm like, hey, where's it at? Oh, sorry. I was supposed to have shipped it out, didn't ship it out. It was what it is. It's a nice piece, don't get me wrong. I mean, the welds on this thing, they're all fantastic. It's stainless steel, so I know it's not gonna rust out up here in the Northeast. It's a fantastic product. It's just the whole process of getting to the point where you can physically have it in your hand and put it on the car is kind of a little bit of a nightmare at this point. So I don't know if maybe he's taking on too many orders that he can handle or what's up with that, but it's here. That's gonna be going on. And what I'm curious is, like I said, when I put that Magnaflow unit on and it sounded absolutely terrible because the exhaust leaks, this still has a little bit of harshness, especially going from a stop and you're first getting on the gas. There's a little bit of harshness, and so I don't know if that Magnaflow secondary pipe that's on there maybe has some exhaust leaks or something in it, and that's what I'm hearing is the harshness. The other thing too is, I mean, this isn't the first car I've ever put an aftermarket manifold on, and it's not my first naturally aspirated vehicle to throw an aftermarket manifold on. And the one thing I've noticed is typically, not always, but typically aftermarket manifolds run a slightly thinner wall piping than your factory units. Factory units, for whatever reason, at least on Subarus, that's about all I know. They run a very thick wall piping, so it could just be resonance from the thinner wall piping that you're hearing is kind of a little bit of buzzing under the front end of the car. But I am curious to see when we get that mid pipe in, if maybe it quiets things up a little bit, which would be nice. So then that leads us to the factory resonated section here. Now this is an OEM piece, it's not the original one. I did fork out the like $350 to get the factory one because originally the flanges had rusted out, and this one here on the left, this is just a Walker unit from Rock Auto. I threw that on there. You can see it only has the single resonator, whereas the factory one appears to have like a dual resonated chamber there. That one over there just sounded absolutely terrible when you were on the gas. So going back to this one, it sounds really, really good. And then lastly, what we have going on here in the back is a set of Nameless Performance axle back mufflers with the 5-inch mufflers in them. Again, the reason I replaced those is the Y pipe here in the back, the flanges rusted out. So the mufflers were useless and the flanges on the original Y pipe were useless, so that needed to be replaced. The weird thing about these mufflers is they are loud. I know they're loud. But inside the car, they don't sound obnoxious. There's a little drone on the highway, a lot of noise, a good amount of noise, which I prefer driving a manual transmission. I really enjoy being able to hear the rev range, hear the exhaust note. It just makes it a much more enjoyable experience, in my opinion, driving a manual. But it wasn't until my wife had to take the car to work not that long ago that when she left the house, I could not believe how obnoxious these mufflers were. You don't hear it inside the car. So to the couple of neighbors I have on my road and anybody that I've driven by that's in like a neighborhood, I'm gonna go ahead and apologize right now. I had no idea that these things were that obnoxious. You can't hear it from inside the car. Inside the car, it's honestly just sounds like a decent exhaust note. Loud, but not obnoxious. But I will tell you what, especially with the higher flowing manifold in the front with the high flow cat and the catted secondary mid pipe, these were just absolutely obnoxious. So the solution to that is going to be replacing it with a set of WRX mufflers. From what I read online, is pretty much any WRX, I believe starting in about 08 and on, that had the dual exit mufflers in the back, not the dual tips, but the two individual mufflers in the back, will fit on the Forester. Now everybody I saw, like in superforester.org forums, did it with the earlier models, like 2011, 2012 WRXs. This was either a 2016 or a 2018. I can't remember exactly. It was a marketplace. I actually got them for free, a marketplace ad that went up. I want to say 16, but they might have been as new as a 2018. And then he also included the Y pipe with that. He was just trying to get rid of it. So shout out to that guy. Really cool that I was able to just pick that up for free. But you can see with the WRX, and I'm assuming because it's turbo, turbos generally quiet down the exhaust flow quite a bit. There's no resonator, and you can actually kind of see where, like from the factory, on a certain model, maybe this is like the same as like an Impreza or something like that, where they would have put the resonator in there. The WRX doesn't have that. So the only concern I'm having is you can see that the Y pipe, the legs that come out, are slightly shorter on the WRX versus this one that's Forester fitment here. I'm hoping that all that is just the muffler placement on the Forester, because the rear end, I'm assuming, is probably a bit wider. The muffler placement might be a bit wider. Like I said, I didn't find anybody that had done it with as new of a WRX. So I'm hoping we don't run into an issue, because if those are too short and I try to connect them, then those dual tips are going to be kind of cockeyed. But we're going to find that out. I have a feeling it's just because the rear end of the Forester is a bit wider. So the mufflers are probably the same, and just the Y pipe's a little bit wider to make up the difference there. But with all that, now you have an idea of what we got going on, what we're doing to the Forester. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do, we need to get this header off of here, and in order to do that, just the way they line the flange up on these models, that mid pipe's gotta come off too. But before this come down, we have to undo our oxygen sensors, and to get to those, and then as well as once we try to get the bolts down here off of the manifold, we need to get these little side splash guards off too. This is how the naturally aspirated models are. I'm kind of considering grabbing the under tray from a turbo model, because they actually have a full under tray that comes back to about here, and I think that might help reduce some of the corrosion, being that I do drive this in the Northeast. But we have to get these down. It's just a push clip and a 10mm bolt in the front, and then up in the wheel well, just another 10mm bolt that you can get to without taking your wheels off. You just got to reach up in there. So we'll get both of these off and we'll keep going. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm not gonna actually fully remove the oxygen sensors. I'm just gonna go ahead and break them free. It's always easier if you can break them free on the car. And then we'll unplug them and we'll just lower this whole thing down, and we'll remove the oxygen sensors completely after. And one thing too to note about the Inferno Fabrications manifold, just the way the sensors point, they're basically in the same location, but I believe it was this rearward oxygen sensor. It doesn't reach the stock location, so I've actually pulled these off of the hanger so that I can get the right angle for the plug, and then just zip tied them both up there. So in my case, to get them down, I gotta unzip tie them. So there's that, both of those undone. So as I mentioned, with the angle of this flange here, it kind of angles like that. You can't actually, at least I've never tried it. Maybe there's a smidgen of room where you might be able to do it, but you really can't drop this manifold down until this mid pipe's out. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna remove these three nuts and bolts. If this was a factory piece, the flange here has studs, and so it's just bolts on the other side. Because this is aftermarket, we've got nuts and bolts in there, and then we'll move back to the mounting points back there. All right, and then the rear end of this secondary catted pipe here, where it connects up to the resonated pipe, you have the typical Subaru spring bolt set up here. I'm sure the factory hardware, these are metric, but every time I buy the Walker replacements from Rock Auto, they come standard. So this is a 13mm nut with a 15mm bolt. And then lastly, we have this 14mm bolt right about the midway point of this pipe. And with all that undone, we can go ahead and wiggle this pipe down out of there. Then we can go ahead and undo the 6 bolts that hold the manifold up, 3 on this head and 3 on the other head. And it's the same exact thing on the other side. So actually, it's kind of nice to be under here. I can see that, like I said, I brought it to a shop to have that welded in, and they removed it and reinstalled it. You can see I did have a bit of an exhaust leak going on there. So that's some of the sound I was hearing in terms of exhaust leak. And on this side, I've already gone ahead and replaced this coolant crossover pipe, whatever you want to call it, once. And it's already getting pretty bad again. I'm gonna at least go ahead and order it so I have it on hand in case it decides to burst, but I've been real busy lately and I don't have the time to replace that. It's a little bit of a nightmare. So maybe this winter when things slow down a little bit, I'll go ahead and replace that. But I'll at least order it so I have it on hand just in case I have to make a last minute repair or something. But that is gonna be nice. I'm gonna go ahead and off camera, I'm just gonna remove these gaskets and scrape the sealant off of there. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, I think they just reused the gaskets last time, which is a little annoying because I gave them new gaskets, which means they kept my gaskets. But being that there's no sealant on the top, I saw this orange sealant and I assumed that they threw more on there. So I was like, oh, that's cool, they threw more sealant on there for me. But it looks like they didn't even use the gaskets that I included for them. No wonder I had an exhaust leak. That's annoying, but we'll go ahead. I'm gonna pull those off, get that cleaned up. Also looks like my timing chain cover, I'm leaking a little bit of oil. Nothing to the point right now where I'm concerned about trying to fix it, but maybe in the future I'll be filming a video on pulling these timing chain covers and resealing those. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get these cleaned up and then I'll bring you over to the bench. We'll swap out oxygen sensors and get this factory manifold installed in there. All right, so now we're going to be going ahead and swapping over these oxygen sensors. I am going to be reusing the sensors. These do have some mileage on them, but generally speaking, they're relatively new. They're definitely not the factory ones. And as far as I know, I believe that they were working fine. So we're going to go ahead and reuse these. Now these do come with a crush washer on them that's not replaceable, or at least I haven't come across anything that says that you can cut them off and then have a replacement available for them. What I do is I put a little bit of RTV silicone. Now I go with this ultra copper. This is supposed to be sensor safe, but even then I'm in that camp of people that doesn't believe that just a small little smear of silicone around the mating surface just to recreate a seal that maybe that crush washer isn't going to give us anymore because it's already been crushed. But again, this is supposed to be oxygen sensor safe, so that's what we're going to go ahead and do. All right, now I probably should have put a little bit of anti-seize on those threads. By all means, it couldn't have hurt, but if I end up having to do manifold work again, it's probably just gonna be a good idea to get some fresh sensors in there. This one's actually really new. This is the upstream one. This one's relatively cheap, or maybe it was vice versa. No, I think it was the upstream one I replaced. I believe this is the cheap one. I believe it's the downstream one that's a bit on the pricey side. So this one's got about, I don't know, I think like 70,000 miles, maybe a little bit less, but somewhere around there. This one's only, I don't know, 4 or 5 months old. I just put that one on not that long ago. I'm assuming actually what was my check engine light popping up, and it started to get more frequently, and then I heard the loosening of this cat. It was simply this cat loosening around in there and then altering the exhaust flow and ultimately how the catalyst was performing. And I'm assuming that that's what was throwing the check engine light on. But we got these oxygen sensors installed, and we'll go ahead and throw our manifold back in the car. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my new gaskets, and I also like to use, anytime I'm replacing exhaust, I really like to use this ultra copper, especially if you're using used parts or aftermarket parts. Sometimes flange faces can be a little bit warped, or maybe there's a little bit of gouge in there from when you were trying to clean up flange faces and stuff like that. What this does is it just helps seal up any little grooves, any little high or low spots that the gasket's not going to take care of. It really works good, especially in turbo applications. This really helped out with my WRX I had some pretty bad sealing issues with the downpipe to the turbo flange, and this worked wonders. So I always use this. It's a matter of opinion. You can use it if you want, but I definitely can't recommend this enough. Both sides of your gasket faces, let it cure, and you really shouldn't have any problems. And so with that, we can go ahead and fit the manifold back up. Now I already have the gaskets up there. What I like to do is put the RTV sealant on the side of the gasket that's going to face up, and that just kind of helps stick it to the head and keep it in place. You don't have to really wrestle with it, being that the studs are on the block and not on the manifold. And then I smear some RTV on the manifold side on the actual flange itself. Then we can simply go ahead and lift it up in place, thread some bolts on by hand, and then cinch the rest down with an impact. And I figure I would just mention, this might look a little bit different than your Forester, just because I live in this Rust Belt area, and all of these heat shields that Subaru installs on these, eventually they just rust and fall off. And so I've removed the tail end of them last time I removed this, but for the most part they all fell off on their own. I'm going to go ahead and cinch these down with an impact, but you can get carried away with an impact, so usually I just snug them down with the impact, and then I'll come back through and hand tighten them, just to get a feel and make sure you don't over tighten anything. And so with those bolts torqued down, we can go ahead and get our oxygen sensors plugged back in. All right, so that's the manifold all taken care of. Like I said, I hope that I was right in that assumption that maybe this cat is fine, and that it was just either the secondary cat was plugged enough to restrict airflow, or maybe it was just old sensors. Just gonna have to leave this on and see how it goes. But now we can go ahead and move on to the mid-pipe. So now, because this is a two-piece mid-pipe, I'm gonna loosely get the front part mounted. We're not gonna put any gaskets or anything right now, because I have a feeling I might have to fit and test fit a couple times. We're gonna get the front piece in, and then it's the rear portion that you trim to the desired length. We'll get this front portion in, and then we'll look about and see how the length's looking, see if I can find a good spot to mark it to get the length that we need. Now, this is where I screwed up last time. When he ships these out, he ships it with this piece still in there, which, again, it's not the type of product that comes with instructions, but I'm assuming that that was not part of it. I kind of assumed that the coupler that comes with it was going to join these two, but realistically that doesn't give you, it's not going to give you a good seal, because you're always going to have a seam there. So I'm assuming that this little piece was just used to press this flange into it, and it actually isn't meant to be used. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know the way that I want to do it, and that's going to actually use this slip joint, and then I'll just use the coupler, and that'll go over, basically over the middle, and squeeze this bit down on the other pipe, making sure everything stays nice and sealed. Just going to kind of eyeball this, and if anything, I'm going to leave it long. Last thing I want to do is cut it too short again. So we're going to cut it right there. I'm going to take it over to the bandsaw real quick, chop that, slip it in, and see how we're looking for length. Yeah, looks like we need to cut a little bit more off that, but it's pretty close. Maybe like a ½ inch, and I think that'll leave room for the donut on there. But we're getting close, like I said. Last thing I want to do is cut too much off. I think that might be good, but right now the only way to tell is going to be able to leave this where it is, take this pipe off, put the donut on, and then fit it into place. It might be a little too tight. You don't want it super tight, specifically the way Subaru mounts these up. It's hard mounted in the center, so you don't want constant tension on this, but I want to see how that looks. We're going to pop this off and put it back in with this mid pipe where it's supposed to be. Alright, so I had to take a minute there. When I took this pipe off, I screwed up the threads on one of the studs on the manifold, so I had to take a die and chase those threads. But now getting this fitted up, there's a little bit of an odd angle here, but that's not really going to be determined by the length of this or anything. So I've marked this because what I want to do is I want to take this down and I want to tap it in and get a nice snug fit right in here. So we're just going to tap it in with a rubber mallet, making sure this is nice and snug. We're still going to have that clamp that goes right here, but that's going to keep this center section nice and sealed and hopefully not get any exhaust leak noise from here. So we're going to go ahead and take this down. I'll prep my gasket in the front and we'll get this pipe fitted up in its final position. All right, so the flange that he uses for this mid pipe doesn't actually accommodate the shoulder of the bolts intended for the spring kit. Now you don't necessarily have to run the spring bolts. I've done it in cars in the past, but it is there for a reason, and honestly the holes aren't too far off. I think I'm just gonna try drilling them out in place if I can get in there and widen them out so I can run these spring bolts. All right, so that fought me the whole way, but it's on there now. You can definitely see that just where this flange is located, it's not really meant to work with these spring bolts. You can see that one's compressed to the point where it's starting to slip over the head of the bolt. This one down here is relatively decent in terms of tension on the spring. Again, how necessary that is, I don't really know. You can see I did put a little RTV. I just put it where the donut meets this part of the pipe because this diameter that he uses is a lot smaller than the inner diameter on the donut gasket, so there's a lot of free play. I just wanted a little bit of a seal there. In theory it should seal itself, but that's on there. We got it lined up, we got the clamp tightened down nice and good. You can see tightened it down to the point where you can actually see the divot from the change in diameter, so that should be sealed up real nice. Got the center bolt mounted back up last just to make sure everything was in position where it needed to be, and the flange up here is all tightened up. So what I'll do is before I drive this, I'm just going to take some brake clean and just wipe my fingerprints off there. Not that this is like a show car or anything, you know, where I'm going to care that much about fingerprints, but you do want to clean them off, especially out stainless steel, because once you heat the exhaust up, you're going to burn those fingerprints right in, and it's going to be super obvious. So last, and what I'm hoping is the easier part now that fought me, is to get these mufflers off and get the WRX mufflers on there. And hopefully we don't run into a fitment issue. Hopefully this just goes smoothly. All right, so to start is real simple. We just got 4 bolts in total, 2 here to get the flanges undone. All right, so I think my battery died there. All we did was we removed the 2 nuts and bolts at both flangers. So the flangers are undone now, if you didn't catch any of that. And then we're going to go ahead and get the mufflers down. Now, if you don't have one of these in your tool arsenal, go ahead and pick one up. It makes getting these hangers here out of the rubber bushings. Super, super easy. I've wrestled with these before. This makes it just an absolute dream. And before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's just grab one of the WRX mufflers and we'll see how it sits in there. So right now the fitment's not perfect. Really just the issue is the flanges don't line up quite right. That flange right there you can see, and then the WRX one is slightly off. But being that we've got the rubber hangers, I think if we get a gasket in there, a couple nuts and bolts, sink those down, all that'll do is move this, and I think worst case scenario might just have to bend one of the exhaust hangers, and I think that'll put it right where it needs to be. Okay, so I went ahead and just dry mounted these mufflers up. There's no gaskets in there right now, but I was right. Just throwing the impact on there torques these a little bit, and you have enough compliance from the rubber hangers that you can get those faces to mount up. So with a good gasket and some silicone copper RTV on there, we should get a good seal. You can see that it does tilt the inner side down slightly, kind of like this. But because it's symmetrical, it really doesn't look bad. Like I can back up all the way behind the car here, and it actually looks really good. It's not a severe angle, but the one thing that is happening right now is it's pretty hard pressed up against the bumper. So I know when I was looking on the forum posts, when people first started realizing that you could put these mufflers on there, a lot of people were against cutting the bumper. I think I'm gonna cut it. Some people said you can get in there with a heat gun. That looks like a lot of room that needs to be made with a heat gun. So I'm just gonna cut it. It's not like it's a brand new car or anything like that. I'm okay with cutting it. I've already had to cut the rear anyway to fit the tow hitch in there. So I'm just gonna kind of mark it, get it as symmetrical as I can. We're gonna take the mufflers back down, cut it, and see how it looks. All right, so I ended up just cutting out the contour in the bumper where the original sort of cutout is for it, and then widened it on both sides. It was gonna look weird just clearancing the sides and essentially having holes there on the sides, on the left and right of this piece, and then having all this plastic there and just having a couple holes. So I decided it would look better just to cut the whole thing out. Now I just gotta go through, clean it up a little bit, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so all I did was come in with a file and just clean up the roughest burrs on there and kind of smooth it up. And then you can come in with a torch and just, you don't have to kill it, just gently kiss the edge with the torch, and it will turn all of those sort of white looking scratches and stuff and those smaller burrs, it'll melt that all and put a shine on it and give it just a little bit more of a finished edge than if you just left it cut. But if my measurements and my just sort of eyeballing were correct, those should be spot on to fit these mufflers back up in there now. All right, so now all that leaves is to get my gaskets up in there with some of the copper RTV silicone on there just for a little bit of a better seal, and these should be good. All right, so just to give you an update on what we're working here, I'm really not sure why the dry fit up was so good. And then once I put the gaskets in, tighten everything down, everything was kind of wonked to this side. Spent some time looking at the hangers. I did bend the hangers a little bit. I was getting it close, and then just As it were, the passenger side forwardmost hanger snapped right off the body. So at least what I'm noticing from that is the stock height hangers on these are a little too high. It wants to hold the muffler up a little bit too high. And so the ones up near the body are squished and the ones down here are stretched. And it just put a lot of tension on there as I was trying to muscle it around and get an idea for where things needed to sit. And yeah, snapped off. So I got to figure out, without having access to a welder, what I'm going to do about that. Because now that that's snapped off and I took it off this side, it's not too bad. It needs to sit up in there a little bit more. But the hangers are a little too tall. But if that hanger didn't snap off, that's honestly not terrible as far as distance below the body. I could just get they make longer hangers for different exhaust setups if you need longer hangers or whatnot. I could just do that. But with both of them off there, it's not terrible, honestly. What I might do is just take a hose clamp and just kind of clamp that side down since I have a hanger. Try to figure out if I can maybe find somebody who can weld a new hanger on for me or figure something else out over here and then get some longer hangers. I'm not sure. But I gotta go to work tomorrow night, so I gotta figure something out. So I'll be back with you. All right, guys, so that was super frustrating. Again, like I said, I don't know why the dry fit was so perfect, and then afterwards, it wasn't perfect anymore. I really wrestled and went back and forth with these. I'm super filthy. I think I have every tool in the shop out right now. But I'll show you what I did. So in the end, one reason why it kept ending up more left and more right is these hangers back in here were fighting each other. They were too far out, so it would kind of like slip, because they're also a little too high, so it would like slip over this way and it would be too far, or if you pushed it back this way then it would slip over that way and be too far. So I took the mufflers back off and I bent these hangers inwards. Now they hang. It doesn't want to punch left or right either way. And then what I did here, it's not the prettiest, but you can see I got a hose clamp there and there's these weird brackets up in there. I'm not 100% sure what those were for, because I think even when the heat shields were in there, they didn't connect to the heat shields. But I just ran it through those brackets, paired it on this side so that the tension pulling on them was sort of similar, because one was wanting to pull it up and one was wanting to pull it to the right. So we just mirrored it on both sides, and they're pretty symmetrical. Like I said, they do have that downward slant, but because it's symmetrical to both sides, I like it. I think it looks pretty good. And I'm tired, and that's about all I want to do today. Everything's bolted up, it's drivable, but I need to get cleaned up. I'm absolutely filthy, so I'm gonna head inside, get cleaned up. We'll get this thing on the ground and we'll get a sense for how it sounds. All right, guys, so it's actually been almost about a month now since I filmed that last little bit. That was just one of those days where a whole bunch of things happened that I wasn't expecting to happen. It took a lot longer than expected. I think I had just about every tool in the shop out here. And I just kind of wanted to finish everything up and just go inside and call it a day. I didn't feel like filming an intro. And then I just got busy doing a bunch of things. So it has been, like I said, about a month since that last little bit, and I've been driving the Forester here with the mufflers on it. And so I thought I would just update now that it has been a month, show you the last few things I did to get these mufflers tied up, at least to where I like them. And then give you an update on how everything else has gone with the other work that we've done on the exhaust. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at these mufflers. All right, so if you remember that last little bit of footage I filmed, the stock metal exhaust hanger for the Forester mufflers snapped off right there at the weld. So this side I had to get creative in terms of making a hanger. What I elected to do was, there's these brackets up there on the frame rail. You can see there, I can't remember if that's just part of how they attached the heat shields for these mufflers from the factory. I do remember I removed those a bit ago just because they rusted out and were basically falling off and just rattling on top of the original mufflers. So I'm not 100% sure what those brackets were, but I used those to get a hose clamp up on there. And then I did take it for a drive, and there was quite a bit of rattling, needless to say, with the steel hose clamp against the steel exhaust hanger. It made quite a bit of noise. So I took a rubber exhaust hanger, I cut it in half, and then I just cut little notches on the sides so that that steel hose clamp couldn't slide off. And then even though the exhaust hanger on this side is still intact, I did the same thing on this side, just so that the pull on the mufflers was exactly the same. And then that did basically what I needed it to do So as far as I'm concerned with what I was going for on this project, which was just to quiet the exhaust down a little bit, I'm perfectly happy with this outcome. I know it's not perfect. You can see on this side, there's a little bit more gap between the muffler tips and the plastic than on this side, and this muffler is just a little bit higher. It sits a little bit higher. So a big reason for that is the exhaust hangers here on the sides. You can see that they're just too tall. They're not actually even hanging in terms of how they're supposed to work. They're actually taking those rubber hangers and they're pressing them right up against the underbelly of the back hatch area there. And it does that on both sides, and that's part of the reason why there's just not great fitment in here. And like I said, when I had researched this project, most of the people that were doing this that had said any year model up when the WRX started going to these dual mufflers should work. I believe that they were working, if I remember correctly now, with like 2012-ish mufflers. And then these were from, I'm pretty sure, I'll have to look it up. I'll have to go back to the Facebook Marketplace when I was messaging with this guy. I believe these are 2016. And I couldn't really find anybody that had used a 2016. And it could just be there's a slight design change from 2011 to 2016. That wouldn't be all that surprising if that were the case. And that might be why. If I could have got my hands on some 2011s or 2012s, maybe that works a little bit better, because I haven't really seen anybody that used the earlier year model WRX mufflers on here have this sort of problem. As far as noise, I was gonna go take a sound clip, but you really can't hear anything inside the car. The sound deadening for this particular car is really good. Anybody who drives this Forester knows that the stock mufflers are like silent. You can't hear anything in the car. There's no sound outside the car. There is enough noise from the exhaust that I like it driving a manual. I can really hear the rev range and I know exactly where I am at. I don't have to look at the tachometer at all, but I do really enjoy being able to hear the exhaust note and the revs of the vehicle. It makes driving a manual just that much more enjoyable in my opinion. I did have a chance to actually hear how these sound. I was transporting some lumber, so I actually had the hatch open a little bit and just tied down with a strap. These actually sound really good from the outside of the car. You can't really hear it inside the car very much. Like I said, you can hear enough of it inside the car, but they do sound really good outside of the car. They actually sound quite a bit like a stock a stock WRX of this year model, with the deepness and the tone of the exhaust. And what I'm kind of wondering is, these mufflers would have been off the FA20 WRX. So I'm almost wondering if when they started switching to the equal length headers on the FA20s and they kind of lost that iconic Subaru sound that people really like, the burble and everything like that, if maybe they redesigned the mufflers to get that back a little bit, because oddly enough, even though this is NA, it does give off a very low, it's not loud, it's not head turning, but it does give off that sort of low note that you get with a stock WRX exhaust with nothing else touched. So I do really like that. I like that there's a good exhaust note to it. It's not obnoxious. So I am really, really happy with how this turned out. Like I said, the angle is growing on me, how these kind of angled down like that a little bit. If memory serves me right, I believe there's a lot of like BMWs and Mercedes out there that run the dual exit exhausts, and they have the same sort of cant to their tips. The only time I don't like it is like if I'm walking out to the car and you see it from this angle. When you look at it from this angle, it is just kind of gives that image of it like being broke or something like that. But definitely from the rear end, it looks really good. It looks aggressive. The tips are a lot bigger than the stock ones. I'm really happy with that. And I'm really happy with this switch, because like I said, after hearing my wife when she took the car out and leaving the house, it was just obnoxiously loud. So I'm glad that it's quieted down now, and that'll be nice for some things to come in the future here that I'll be using this car for, having a quieter exhaust on there, not something that drones like crazy inside the car. So with that said, that moves us on to the Inferno Fabrications center pipe here. Really nothing to note on this. I mean, there's nothing negative really about it. It sounds good. Like I had mentioned, if I remember right, in the original install when we did this, there's just something about stainless steel exhaust, especially on an NA car, that there's a certain resonance to just the material of the piping that gets just a little tinny sounding, and you can hear it, but it's not overwhelming. It's really just like summertime driving when I have the windows down and you're first starting out like from a traffic light, getting moving after being at a stop. You can kind of hear it as it reverberates down off the pavement. But it's just one of those things when you switch to a stainless steel exhaust especially on an NA 4-cylinder car, it's just something that happens. Just the difference between, like I said, the stainless steel material and then like the thicker, I believe it's because it's thicker walled steel that the manufacturers typically use. And then lastly, that just brings us onto the manifold. It solved the problem that manifold over there was giving me, being that it doesn't have a loose catalytic converter core in here rattling around, making just an absolutely awful racket. So it solved that problem, but I am getting my P0420 catalyst and efficiency code still, and it seems to be more frequent with this. And like I had said, I had felt when I took this off that this cat was failing due to the original manufacturer defect with these FB25s, where they were just chewing through oil. Oil that ends up going through your exhaust system really does contaminate and will destroy your catalytic converters. However, before I took that old manifold out, I was still getting that catalyst and efficiency code. And one thing I didn't try that I'm gonna try first, because like I said, this is like a $1,300 unit here, this manifold with the integrated converter. I do wanna try and replace this upstream oxygen sensor. Even though I have replaced this, it's been in and out a couple times as I switched manifolds in and out when I was trying to resolve the issue originally. And even though it didn't seem like that long, I kind of sat down the other day and I realized that even though to me it doesn't seem like I did this work all that long ago, it has been quite a while, and this oxygen sensor has been in there for quite a bit. The downstream oxygen sensor I replaced relatively recently because it's the cheaper of these two. I'll spend the like 150 bucks, I think these upstream ones are, and I'll replace that and just see if that solves my problem. I'd rather spend $150 and solve my problem than spend $1,300 and it not solve my problem. And then if that doesn't fix it, just for ease of getting my vehicle inspected annually, I'll probably just go ahead and replace this, because this is, when I was running this manifold and the cat started to deteriorate mechanically, like I said, it was just loosening up, rattling around. I was getting that code maybe once a month and a half, 2 months if I was lucky. But it wasn't the end of the world, because that's plenty long enough after resetting the check engine light to have all your monitors become ready and go and get the car inspected. This is coming on now about once a week, 2 weeks if I'm lucky, and that's really just not enough time to be able to schedule an appointment to get in and get my car inspected and have the monitors all ready and not have the code come back on while I'm trying to get in and get the inspection. And really that's what it comes down to. This is my daily driver. It's supposed to be my just hop in, turn the key, get to work, get to the store, wherever it is I'm going. And if I'm chasing a check engine light all the time, that's gonna give me that much of a headache trying to get my annual inspection done. I'd really just like to get that fixed. So even though $1,300 is a bit of a tough pill to swallow, if the upstream oxygen sensor doesn't solve it, then we'll be going ahead and replacing out this manifold. So that's going to go ahead and do it for this one, guys. I did also just want to make one quick note, particularly about this car, if you're looking into these sort of things. Even though this body style spans from 2009 to 2013, if you have a 2009, a 2010, or a first half of 2011 Forester, it's going to have the original EJ 2.5, the 2.5 liter EJ series engine in it. And then if you have a second half of 2011, 2012, or 2013 Forester, that has the newer FB 2.5 engine in it, 2.5 liters. It's just the newer FB series engine. And the only reason I want to note that is the manifold design in the front of the car is going to be different. The EJ series engines have always had that sort of unequal length design to them, and therefore they're going to have a slightly different exhaust note than these FB25s, which have more of, I can't even really call it an equal length, it's more of just a log style manifold where all your runners come into kind of a big plenum and then it exits out the exhaust. So the exhaust notes on those two different engines are going to sound a little bit different, so you may get slightly different results from adding these particular exhaust components to your car. It also may be another reason why these mufflers didn't fit. I'm not 100% sure. I know I had a coworker of mine before I switched jobs. He brought his Forester out. We were doing some work on it, particularly changing out his mufflers. And at least in terms of the aftermarket parts that he went ahead and provided while we were working on it, the resonated pipe here, this center pipe, was a different design for the EJ series versus the FB series engines. So it could be possibly that this Y section here in the rear end is designed a little bit differently for the FB. I don't really know, just wanted to make that note again if you're looking into these sort of things. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, be sure to give the video a like. Feel free to leave a comment below, and if you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing. Thanks.